friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Well, it's official. We are back for another exciting episode of Watching Comics. Are you ready, Jake?
I'm very ready.
Good. That's better than not very ready.
Yeah, which, I think puts me ahead of where I usually am.
Totally. So it's a good night.
It is. It's going to be a great night. I actually think it's an especially great week for you. I don't know if I should let you introduce this to all of our listeners, but a very special someone to you had an 80th anniversary this week.
Yeah, it was kind of a big deal. And as a lifelong Superman fan, if you're listening to this podcast, but you don't follow comics or comic book movies at all, like in any social media platform, and
then
you're not aware,
then
God bless you. But you're also a little weird to be listening to this anyway. But
hi, Mom.
Anyway, hi, Jake's mom. We love you anyway. But yesterday was the 80th anniversary of Superman's character being launched into American pop culture. 80 years ago, Action Comics #1 hit shelves, and it completely transformed modern society, pop culture, and the comic book and entertainment industry as we know it. And so yesterday was not only that big day, but it also marked the release of the 1000th issue of Action Comics itself as well, which is the homestay comic of Superman and Lois Lane and the rest of his normal gang. So it was a really, really big day. And I got the nice big Action Comics history, 80 years of Superman, like 400-page compendium in the mail, which is great. Got my Action Comics 1000th copy or 1000th comic, which was wonderful. And I busted out all of my Superman stuff. And I wrote this really cool nostalgic piece online about the first time I went to the comic book store. And it was a very important and fun day for me to both experience like this cool thing that I've been attached to for over 20 years, this milestone, but then also just kind of relive some nice thick nostalgia too. It was nerdtastic. It was childlike. It was man boy awesome. It was just really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, and for anyone who hasn't picked up on this yet, Mitch is more in the DC wheelhouse. I enjoy DC a great deal, but I think Mitch lives there more than I do. For shiz. And Superman is definitely what?
I said for shiz. Just keeping my street right out there.
Yeah, I mean, and so Mitch definitely is more the Superman expert than me. I just think, though, that, like, no matter where you land on this, like, if pop culture is not how it is without this. And, I really think it's important to just consider two high school guys came up with this character and 5 years later had him in Action Comics #1. And if you know the whole story, it wasn't a great business decision, spoilers, but
they lost money.
They lost, just a sizable fortune and one of the most recognizable characters of the 20th century. Not a lot, just a small loss. But it's a really big deal. And I think it's summed up best with, there was a crossover comic it's probably like 10 years ago now, called Final Crisis, that looks like it's going to be one thing and all this stuff happens. And at the end of it, though, it's all by this guy, Grant Morrison, who is a really trippy meta storyteller. And the conclusion of Final Crisis is basically this heartwarming moment after like the darkest, worst time in the DC universe. They say, this guy Superman, he might not even be real. But if he's not real, then that's an even bigger deal, because it means that there are people out there that are capable of conceiving of a character like this. And it's this really awesome love letter to just what superhero comics are and to what this genre is and can be at its best. And I have said many times that I really feel like superheroes are our modern day mythology. They serve that same purpose for us that Hercules and Zeus did for the Greeks, or Odin and Thor for those wacky Vikings. And I just think that, like, it's a really big moment. It's a really big deal, no matter where you fall on the spectrum of loving comic books, hating them, loving movies, hating them, or my mom, who, confession, does not listen to this crap actually. But wherever you fall on that, it's just such an insane moment in pop culture that it really does deserve honoring and stopping and acknowledging. And also, good on DC for making that schedule line up to get issue 1000 out on the 80th anniversary.
They were on top of it, absolutely on top of it. The thing that's remarkable about Superman is that I promise we'll get to the other stuff here in a second. But
this actually isn't even our topic tonight.
Yeah, I know, right? Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the guys that created Superman, are a couple of Jewish teenagers at the time who were recognizing that in 1938 the world was at an apex of just unrest, and they really wanted to experience something fantastical and escapist, but also very hopeful. And they created that. And what they didn't realize they were going to do was usher in an entire age of the superhero, which was going to be something of great influence and lasting power that ultimately comes back to this concept of like, we can see our best selves and see a different way of the way things can be and see things in a pure light completely differently with this sort of world being thrust upon us. And ironically, it gives us a sharper glimpse of our humanity at the same time. So I wrote this piece. If you want to check it out, it's on our Twitter and on my Twitter. It's called My First Comic Book and Why Superheroes Make Us Better. It's pretty easy to find online if you follow my stuff. But I wrote this piece where I kind of talk about how I go to the comic book store the first time with my dad and I get my first Superman comic. And then I kind of break it up into the section then about how it changed my life, but then also how Superman and comic books and superheroes kind of just changed everything. And there's a little piece that I just want to shout out here. It says, comic books give us heroes of different colors, creeds, societal contexts, sexual attractions, and they deliver it in a way that dares us to reimagine what may be seen as good in another. And all of that through the medium of visual art and the written word. And comic books with all of these types of heroes, they are more than just entertainment. They allow us to embrace humanity and fuel a fire of hope, identity, and confidence. We love them because they are a radical art form that allows us to both celebrate our childlike wonder as well as inspire us to be our best selves regardless of our age. And I just think that is a big, big deal. And it's not that Superman accomplished all of this. It's that Superman carried this new age on his shoulders and ushered it in. And it's just so incredible to think about how much social commentary, how much creative storytelling, how much important moments for identification and people seeing themselves on the page and on the screen and all these things. All of that is made possible because of the arrival of Superman. And Superman is still thriving today, which is pretty incredible 80 years later. But it's just comic books and superheroes are not a small thing. If they're merely escapism for you, that's great. That serves a big purpose, but they're also not a small thing. And that's just kind of how this big anniversary, just gave me time and space to really chew on that for a while. And it was great for me to realize that at age 30 with a daughter who I give comic books to and all of these things, and just realize that, yeah, it does mean something in addition to it being fun and childlike at the same time.
You know, and truly the most incredible thing is that we seriously just winged it on that whole segment. Zero prep, zero communication beforehand. I just opened my big mouth and there we went. So imagine what we'd be capable of with some planning.
I know, but at the same time, the spontaneity is what keeps people coming back to the water cooler. I mean, right?
I do deliberate. To be fair, I joke a lot about I call this crap and stuff. I'm actually pretty proud of this podcast. And to be clear, I go pretty far out of my way to give us that natural, I want instant reaction. I want you and I to be having a really natural conversation. So I actually try really hard not to communicate much with Mitch in the lead up about what we're going to say.
True story. Jake and I have a text strand going on, and most of it is a random assortment of emojis or questions saying, "Are your kids in bed so we can record tonight?" That's about it.
Right. Yeah. Various technical difficulties being explained.
pretty much, because this is what the dad life is like. We're just finding our way in the dark, man. So the real reason we're here is because next week, Jake, I don't know if you're aware, but a big movie is coming out next week.
Yeah. Oh man, I had a great joke to go and I just blew it. Let's move on. It's Avengers.
and it's not just Avengers. It's Avengers starring every single A and B list celebrity in the history of Hollywood ever. And they're somehow going to try to make this movie less than 3 hours and give everyone screen time and all of that stuff. But it's the team up superhero movie of, like, I don't know, like it just, the trailers make it look like it's Michael Bay's wet dream. It's what it looks like. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Avengers : Payday, because everybody's in this thing, like, getting there. And Marvel's notorious about not paying people a ton. So I'm sure Robert Downey Jr. is going to get like $3 billion per second on screen, and everybody else is making about what I do per hour. And so, it's going to, man, it's so huge. Like, can you imagine, like, 15 years ago, if somebody told you this movie was going to happen, and not just that it was going to happen, but that it wouldn't just be like you, me, and 3 guys from college standing in line to see it.
And it doesn't look like it's going to be like one of those awesomely bad, I make fun of this movies type of thing.
Right.
Like, it's going to be high quality.
Yeah, this isn't 90s Fantastic Four or the Star Wars Christmas special. This is real deal, man.
Real deal. And I do want to get to a point where we predict who is going to die in this movie, but we don't want to. I don't want to do that yet. Cool. Before we watch Avengers next week and we dish on it on this podcast, because this is your preeminent source of comic book movie opinions, then we wanted to definitively decide here a week before this big movie, because it's very possible that Infinity War may mark the last or the beginning of the end of the first ushering in of the chapters of Avengers, of like Iron Man and Captain America and some of the old guard who have been doing this for almost 10 years. So we are here to decide once and for all, between Jake and myself, who has the better movies, Iron Man or Captain America. So Jake, just for anybody that doesn't quite understand the difference or fully following the difference between their respective movies and the Avengers movies and all those sorts of things, you want to break down which movies we're actually talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, for my prep work for this, I'm not thinking about the Avengers films, right? So the Avengers and then Age of Ultron are off the table here. So I think it's a 3 versus 3 situation. You've got Iron Man, Iron Man 2, and Iron Man 3. And then you have Captain America, who does not care for numbers and instead does subtitles.
He likes colons.
Yeah, he's all about the colons.
Iron Man's a counter because he has money, and Captain America is a colon because he enjoys linguistics.
Perfect. Well done, man. I think we just summed up all of the last 10 years of pop culture.
Boom, you're welcome.
No, but so you've got the first Avenger, then Winter Soldier, and then Civil War are the 3 Captain America films. And so it's kind of a 3 versus 3 situation there.
Okay, so those are the 6 movies we're talking about. And Jake and I, as we kind of allude to, we don't really have a script or plan going into this. We basically just say, hey, let's try to decide who's got the better movies. So, Jake, I'm just going to kind of decide here off the cuff, or maybe you've been thinking about this for 3 days. I don't know. How about you just rattle off for me real quick your top 6 ranking 1 through 6?
Ooh, I didn't go that deep in it. This is good. So this is going to be a little bit spontaneous. Okay, you and I know where our big disagreement is going to happen, because my number 1 is probably your number 6, I think. And
yes, I was hoping that would happen.
Yeah, I really think you and I may land. I don't know. We'll see. I think we may land really similarly, except on this film, because I think Civil War is just a tick under The Dark Knight for perfectly made superhero cinema.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Wait. Jake.
And that's how the podcast ended. Man. Like, they never heard from us again.
Yeah. So, well, it's been a good run. Happy trails.
Do you want me to break that
you.
down, or do you want me to do my 6? Because I can do either.
I just want to say we'll finish the 6 after I just say that I expected Civil War to be towards the top of your list, but the fact that you said it in the same breath as Dark Knight really makes me cringe. I have a clenched fist right now, like right by my mouth, and I'm wanting to bite my finger. It's just like I'm having a visceral reaction here. So I need the audio to reflect that you did that to me.
And I think I've got the clear visual image, and I'll elaborate a little bit when we get to that point. But so for me, it goes Civil War's tops, Winter Soldier is second. The original Iron Man comes in third. First Avenger, the original Captain America, is fourth. Iron Man 3 would be fifth, and Iron Man 2 is sixth, is how I would rank them.
Okay, that's really interesting. And we do differentiate a little bit here, so that's good for the sake of parity here. So right, I will do.
It's gonna be a much more interesting episode.
Exactly, it's more than just high five. We agree. I hate it when people do this. I almost want to say 1A, 1B because it's really difficult for me to split hairs between number 1 and number 2. But I think I can definitively say until I change my mind 5 minutes from now. Number 1, Winter Soldier. Number 2, Iron Man 1. Number 3, First Avenger. Number 4, Iron Man 2. Number 5, Iron Man 3. Number 6, Civil War.
Yeah, we probably should have done one another's lists and see where we came out.
Right? I think see how badly we insulted each other. Okay, so I think it's pretty clear from your list, if we're just looking from the sheer rankings, it's pretty clear to determine that you believe Captain America has the best movies tied to his name.
The way that I think
he's in your top 2 spots.
Yeah, absolutely. The way I would summarize it is I think that I don't want this to turn into any kind of like slam on the Iron Man films because I think they're great. I think Tony Stark's the more interesting character, but I think Captain America's benefited from the better films. But I think you can also make a strong case that Captain America really benefited and got really lucky when they went and landed the Russo brothers to run his last 2 films, and now the Russos are running the Avengers franchise. And I think that, with the Iron Man movies, they're kind of the prototypes, right? Like we're still sort of figuring out how to move the superhero genre beyond the excellent but formulaic Spider-Man films, X-Men films of the early 2000s. And we're trying to say these were great stepping stones, but how do we go beyond that? And Iron Man is where we start ironing the kinks out.
Such a dad pun.
But, and so I don't want to say, because I think that the Iron Man films are great. And I think that, oh my gosh, I just spaced his name. Director, played Happy Hogan.
Jon Favreau.
Thank you, Favreau. I think Favreau is a great filmmaker, and I am not trying to take any shots because I don't think if Favreau doesn't do what he does, I don't think Captain America movies are as good as they are. But if you're just asking me better movie to just sit down and watch, I got to go with the Captain America films.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I agree with you on a couple of concepts. Like Iron Man is by far the more interesting character. And because but it's also, I guess, just maybe a difference of preference on story arc and what sorts of components you enjoy about superhero movies. Because I feel like the most interesting character in the Captain America lore is Bucky, the Winter Soldier. But I guess you just have to decide then, like, if you're just talking about what is compelling about your main characters, what do you want? Do you want a more compelling person who may be more wearing the black hat, or do you want a more compelling leading man? And that seems to be the dichotomy there, because I just don't think that Steve Rogers is that interesting of a character. At least in the way that I'm not as familiar with him in the comics, but at least the way that he's portrayed in the movies, he is just, he's a glorified Boy Scout. And I get that that's the way he has to be with the way that they've set up those movies. But for someone who genuinely enjoys cinema, and for someone who tends to go more towards the DC side where there's a little bit more nuance and gritty characterization and stuff like that, I am more interested in a little bit more character study in what I have. And so that may be part of the reason why I'm not, I don't know, Civil War, I just felt like the stakes weren't really earned in that movie. And Winter Soldier did such a good job of establishing that struggle of relationship and which side do I need to be on and who do I need to fight for and what do I need to preserve, that I don't think it carried over as well into Civil War. I guess I wasn't as gripped by the Bucky thing as much in Civil War being the divisive thing in that movie as it was the driving force of Winter Soldier. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I think to speak to a couple things you said there, I want to grab and run with a little bit. It's interesting you mentioned Captain America, Steve Rogers, as the Boy Scout character, because I was actually getting ready to say I think that one of Superman's nicknames is the Big Blue Boy Scout. Mm-hmm. And I think Captain America is a compelling character for the same reason Superman is. Because when written correctly, Captain America represents an ideal to shoot for. I don't
disagree with you, but at least cinematically with these movies, I don't feel like Captain America has suffered nearly as much loss or turmoil or placement anxiety to the likes that Superman does. Like Superman starts his story off by losing his entire heritage. Steve Rogers is still an American human, like those sorts of things. But I agree with you in the concept that like this Boy Scout painted in blue, leading a charge of a powerful ideal that unites people, that is universal.
Well, and that's just it. Like I think with Captain America and Iron Man, in a way, and this is oversimplifying a few things, but in a way, you're talking about the same dichotomy you get in Batman and Superman, because one is the stories are at their best in whatever medium, right? Because we've talked before about, I don't necessarily want to see a complete recreation of a comic book on screen, but I do want the spirit of the thing to be maintained. And I think that the spirit of those characters are similar in that with Captain America or Superman, what you've got is the fully formed ideal. It's a character that he can struggle, he can doubt, but at the end of the day, he has to represent what's best in us. Whereas Batman and Iron Man, you've got a little bit more of a look at like a character who's all about overcoming our hubris and a character who is about our limitations more than our strengths. And I think that that's a more compelling story as far as character study goes. And so I think that's why, if you're asking me who's the more interesting character study, to stick to our discussion for this episode, I think Iron Man is the more interesting character study. And if you look at the Marvel films from Iron Man 1 to where we're at right now, about to go into Infinity War, I think that Iron Man has had more of an arc and he's had more of an interesting growth as a character. And you could make the case that Civil War is really in a lot of ways the outcome of that. And it's the fruition of his story more than it is Steve Rogers. But all that being said, again, to me, it's just the more entertaining films. You know, I just think Winter Soldier and Civil War are pretty nearly perfectly what they set out to be.
I think Winter Soldier is, well, I guess until Black Panther came along, Winter Soldier was kind of just at the top of my list of the best of the Marvel ilk. Question.
Yes.
Do you think Iron Man 1 is the best first installment of a series of comic book movies for a character? I.e., do you think it's better than Batman Begins or Man of Steel or the first Superman movie or the first Spider-Man movie or any of those?
That's a really good question. And my brain goes about 100 different ways on that.
I just was thinking about that as we've been talking, and I think I'm comfortable putting it in like the top 2, top 3, because I keep thinking about how part of the reason why Iron Man was so influential was because we hadn't done this yet. 2008 is when the first one came out. It's the first of any of these updated superhero movies outside of Batman Begins to come out. And because I mean, I guess we had the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans before then, but they didn't lead to this larger universe. You know what I mean? So it's like, Iron Man felt like, I remember watching it, feeling like I was watching a new way of making a film. It wasn't just watching a superhero movie. I felt like I was being thoroughly entertained and wowed simultaneously by something that was new. Like it felt new. It felt like something was going to be different after this. And all of those other movies feel like it falls into that energy. You know what I mean? Even some of the DC movies can be kind of clumped into that energy. And so I think I'm comfortable saying Iron Man 1, better than Spider-Man 1, better than Man of Steel, as much as I hate to say that. Like if I'm just thinking cinematically and I'm not thinking like favoritism wise. And I think it's better than Batman Begins. If not, it's in the conversation as just as good as Batman Begins. I don't know if I want to say it's better than the first Superman movie with Christopher Reeve, but it's like, the more I think about it, I'm like, if we're just talking about the first ones, it might be up there.
What about, because I'm sitting here thinking like there's got to be something I'm missing. What about Tim Burton's original Batman?
Oh, see, Batman Returns like leaves it in its dust. Not even close.
Yeah, I mean, no, Batman Returns is certainly the more mature movie there. There's a growth from Batman to Returns, but if you're just asking best first installment.
That's true. I would say, yeah, Iron Man's better, just because I think Batman, Burton's first Batman has great nostalgia and it has iconic faces in it. But I actually recently went back and rewatched the first Batman. I've watched it, I think, 2 or 3 times
for a while.
I've rewatched it 2 or 3 times over in as many years, actually. And it does not hold up very well. Like there's some fun rompiness to it, but it just doesn't. I don't think it holds up very well compared to the first Superman movie or compared to Batman Returns or some of these older ones. I think it's aged pretty poorly, and as much as Jack Nicholson was iconic, I think his performance is just a little too juvenile and not quite what it should be. And Burton wrote Keaton's Batman very poorly in that first movie and didn't give him enough, exposition and enough stakes with the Kim Basinger love connection. I've rewatched it enough to think like, man, it's good, but it's missing something. I just think that every time I watch it.
Is it possible with Iron Man, the original one, that we underrate it because it was so good that so many things ripped it off and so many things drew, maybe not even ripped off, but drew their inspiration from it, that it feels derivative when in fact it's the originator? Is it like when we go looking for somebody else to be the greatest player ever when Michael Jordan's right there in front of us? Are we just overlooking the obvious and underrating it?
It might be, and just for the sake of having a number to put on it, IMDb has a rating system. And there are over 784,000 people who have rated Iron Man and over 600,000 people who have rated Captain America the Winter Soldier. Iron Man is sitting at 7.9. Winter Soldier is sitting at 7.8. And those are the 2 highest ratings of all 6 movies we're talking about.
Just to be that guy, I might point out that Captain America Civil War is also at a 7.8.
No, yeah, well, yeah, whatever. But that has 200,000 less people. I'm just saying.
Well, an Age of Ultron is at a 7.6, or 7.6. So I mean,
Age of Ultron,
so it can't be that perfect.
Age of Ultron could also be called Age of Toilet Trash.
It's just age of trailers. It's like The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It could have been a good movie. They just spliced in too many references to other movies that never even happened.
Or dare we just say the Avengers 2 Age of Joss Whedon sucks? Did I just blatantly say it exactly what it is, just matter of fact?
So let's get back on.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's get back on track
into the big one. Like I want to get at it here because I think the crux of this discussion might be Civil War, because it's the only movie that truly stars both of them, right? Like, even though it's a Captain America film, all of the promo art is the two of them staring each other down, and all of the story, like, Iron Man launches the story as much as Captain America does, and the two of them conclude it together. So I really think that this is deserving of a little bit of our discussion time is Civil War. So can you break down for me, because we've alluded to this, but we've never truly analyzed it. Where's the breakdown for you of Civil War? Like, just rate that sucker for us. Give us a mini review.
Okay. So the biggest thing for me there are a lot of things that I think about when I go into a movie, but if you want me to just say this is arguably the most important component of whether I believe a story works or not when I'm looking at a movie, and I understand what I'm about to say, it may seem like a little film nerdery, but it's possible to bend this into whatever context it is I'm watching a movie. So it's not like I may sound like I'm talking about an Oscar contender, but this also matters in a movie in comic book ilk as well, right? Like I understand that those sorts of things adapt, but basically what it all comes down to for me with Civil War is I don't feel like the schism, the divide, the tipping point that makes the line in the sand be crossed to a point where we literally call this a civil war and Captain America and Iron Man must fight each other. I do not think there was a single ounce of that dispute that was earned in the way that they unfolded the story on screen. It felt very rushed, very underdeveloped, and very paper thin, if I could just kind of speak in some broad strokes there. It just seemed like, okay, we're going to sign these accords so that the other countries know that we're not going to be horrible people and invade and be dangerous and all that sort of stuff. And then, but that also means we've got to bring Bucky in because he's a dangerous threat and stuff. And Captain America is all kind of like, but he was my best friend a long time ago, and I'm not going to sign your piece of paper. And now holy hell breaks out and everybody's fighting the most dangerous war the universe has ever seen. Like, I don't know. I get that there's a lot of people in the movie and you've got to give everyone their time to say their campy one-liners because it's got to be half funny, half serious because it's a Marvel movie. And there was a lot of moments like that were good. But at the same time, you've got to convince me that the biggest war, the biggest, most incredible and potentially dangerous and literally earth-shattering conflict this universe is ever going to see. You have got to convince me that there is a reason to pick sides. You have got to convince me that there is a reason for people to be angry and fight against their friends and coworkers. And I could not buy into it. I wasn't. And that seems to be the crux of the movie for me, right? Now, granted, it's a better team-up movie than Avengers 1 and Avengers Age of Ultron. I'll give you that. But I found myself having the debate on, is Civil War better than Batman versus Superman? And as much as I love DC and as much as I enjoyed Batman versus Superman, I saw it twice in theaters. But again, I have a bias going into that one. That movie has glaring flaws. And with as tight as the Russo brothers are able to create movies and with as much lore as Civil War had, I shouldn't be able to have the conversation of which one was better, BVS or Civil War. Civil War should have blown it out of the water, and I just don't think it did. So I was just talking a whole lot right there. I'm going to stop now and let you rebut.
No, you answered the question pretty well. I think it's interesting because I think that you and I mean, it almost sounds like you saw a different movie than me. And it's so fascinating, the different perspectives we've got here, because I don't think Bucky is the crux of the film. I think is a MacGuffin the right term there? Like, he's not exactly.
Maybe. I
think it hinges on Bucky at certain plot points, right? Like, he turns the plot but I don't think that he's the conflict necessarily until the very end. I think that I felt like the conflict was, well, so let's compare the DC Marvel end of it again, because Snyder debate, one thing Snyder kept saying when people were critical of Man of Steel is, but I wanted there to be real world consequences. And I kept looking at it like, well, giving me an extra 30 minutes of buildings falling down isn't necessarily real world consequences. But when that woman comes to talk to Tony Stark and is like, yeah, my kid died in your super robot fight, thanks a lot, jerk. And when all this stuff is going down, I feel like Civil War to me is the Avengers movie that Ultron couldn't be. And it actually redeemed Ultron a little bit for me, because even though Ultron's still kind of a rough watch, it is now something that led to this moral conflict for Tony Stark, because it felt so earned to me, because you've got from Iron Man 1 where he becomes, he realizes he's been an arms dealer and a war profiteer. So he's trying to turn that around, and he won't be responsible for his tech hurting people anymore. And then it grows to meaning well, he creates Ultron, and so many innocent people die because of that. And then in Civil War, you've got this next evolution of that Tony Stark struggle where he's trying to say, I have to protect people. I have so much to redeem myself for. And in an effort to redeem myself, I gave myself more to be redeemed for. And he's so driven, and he's so like, he's like Captain Ahab after that whale. And he's got to get what he's after. And on the other hand, you have Steve Rogers, where there's this, I think the crux moment for him is not necessarily Bucky. That's the emotional tie, right? But like the real moment for the Civil War and the justification for it is that moment where he says, Tony, I understand where you're coming from, but the safest hands are still ours. And he says, I can't let some government's politics tell me that the Avengers can't come in and save people. And it created this real world consequence where the other movies all got to be what they were. But then in Civil War, we sat down and said, you can only blow up evil robots for so long before somebody gets caught in this, right? And I felt like, it was a really relatable conflict. And I felt like it was the superhero version of debates I've had with friends over politics or over policy decisions people have made in business, in entertainment, and whatever. And it was really understandable. And then to speak to the Bucky thing, for me, like I gotta be real, they had me hooked the moment that in that first trailer, I think it was the first one, they're talking and Steve is like, I gotta protect him. He's my friend. And when Iron Man looks at him and he's like, yeah, so was I. Like, I wanted to just start weeping in the theater. I was like, oh my gosh, no. And I was like, no, the bromance is over. And it was such that moment in the movie is so rough for me. Like, I seriously tear up at it. And I know that sounds so lame, but I'm always like, no, friendship's so important. And man, so it's really interesting. And I don't say any of that necessarily from like a debate standpoint, but just to point out how fascinating it is, like the different perspectives we brought into this movie. Because for me, Civil War is like the apex of the Marvel films. And it's just like, I also felt like, man, I cared about every single character on the screen. The Vision, like, how much did he just get used as a Deus Ex Machina in Ultron? And they're like, well, we're going to need a good robot to fight the bad robot. Here he is, guys. But then in this, it's like freaking Vision is out there with his maybe 10 minutes on screen.
Yeah, he's not there long.
Yeah, he's barely there, but every moment he's there, I'm like, oh man, he's really struggling with what to do here. And that is a robot who never makes mistakes, and yet he just shot his friend on accident. Holy crap. And man, I don't know, man, Civil War. Whew, I love it. I want to go watch it now that we've had this conversation.
I will try to concede a little bit here and say it could be possible that I may not be as emotionally involved in the main characters, Steve and Tony, because the first two Avengers movies were I just thought they were both so bad. I thought the first Avengers movie was just a muddled mess of they tried to hammer out a formula and realized the formula doesn't work when you've got 50 people on screen. And then Ultron was just really bad characterization and dialogue written for Ultron mainly. But I think it's potentially possible that those two movies soured me to a point that I didn't have any emotional stakes in Tony and Steve by the time Civil War came across. So then it's like I could have been watching the movie saying like, okay, up the ante and buy me back. Like bring me back into this, because I agree. I think your assessment on the political and realistic side of things is very astute, and that's clearly the apex they were trying to build up to. But at the same time, I don't know. There were so many bumps along the way that it's really tough for maybe I'm the only one, but it just feels really tough for me to be able to see it as a cohesive route when clearly it could have been better along the way. Is that fair?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from on that. I mean, it's not necessarily a line of thinking that I agree with, but it's one that I understand. Like I see where you're getting at.
Yep. And also I also get that there's massive bias involved here. Like I can blatantly tell you that Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman have glaring flaws. I will be able to tell them to you straight to the face and 100% know that they are glaring flaws. But you know what? I cried at both of those movies. I saw Man of Steel and wept because it was so wonderful for me to see a character that I had been tied to for so long and emotionally identified with on so many different levels, and finally get a big screen experience that was worthy of my time. And Batman versus Superman, it was like, you know what? Yeah, campy as it is, I cried when Superman killed Doomsday and died. I did. Both times I saw the movie. I cried when that Hans Zimmer operatic music played. So I get that when we're and I say that because you are much more married to Marvel than I am too. And so you're coming in with a little bit more nuance and emotional history and context there. And so it is really difficult in the I'm talking about these movies like they're a really big deal sometimes, but like it's really difficult. I think it's really difficult to separate our bias to the superhero arena than it is in a lot of others. Like I feel like I can be a whole lot more objective when I'm breaking down Oscar movies than I can be when I'm breaking down the difference between Marvel and DC movies. Cause at the end of the day, it's like, hey, you better watch your shit, man. Superman's my guy. Even though Superman doesn't need me to defend him.
I also think one thing that has probably been revealed about the two of us throughout this process is I think you're a lot more forgiving of a person than I am, because you're able to sit here and be like, yeah, you know, Man of Steel's got some problems, but I really enjoyed it because that character meant a lot to me. And I, on the other hand, grew up as a huge Spider-Man fan and X-Men fan. And so I'll sit here and be like, yeah, Sam Raimi's a brilliant filmmaker that I would punch in the head at least twice for Spider-Man 3. And so I think
Spider-Man 3 is a crime against humanity.
But I get the feeling, Mitch, that like if you were more of a Spider-Man guy, you'd have found something to love in there. And I say that as a compliment, as much as it doesn't sound like one.
Well, I mean, the two musical numbers. I mean, you tell me.
I really get the feeling that what we're learning here is that you're a more forgiving person than me, because I am sitting here like, if you mishandle these characters, you know, you could, these guys are like, these filmmakers, it's like you can go do these terrible things on the side. And I'm like, well, you know, you got to learn to separate art from the people who make it. And that's tough sometimes. And I understand this and that. And then it's like, oh, you did what with Peter Park? Absolutely not. And
yeah, right. He was hallowed. You do not do that. I will say, side note, we need to do an episode on this. You know how Star Wars has this machete order thing about how it's a different way to watch the movies and it's kind of taken the internet by storm?
Yes.
Yes. So Star Wars machete order. I've kind of developed a machete order of sorts for the X-Men movies where we can cut a few out and reorder a few things and just get the good and get rid of the bad and still get, I think, almost the entire narrative intact. We need to do that sometime. Your comment about X-Men made me think about that.
I really want an X-Men episode once this dust clears on this Infinity War thing, because I really think the X-Men to Marvel is a fascinating thing that we could really break down. And I also have some theories that I am itching to get out there about how they're going to make it happen.
Rock on. All right. We're going to do that soon.
Yeah.
I do want to give what I think is really interesting about breaking down Iron Man and Captain America. A couple of things I wanted to mention. Number one is Captain America they were bold in taking the most well-known and most, I guess, developed over a long period of time villain and taking him in the first movie and getting rid of him entirely in that same movie.
You know,
that takes stones.
They wanted to do more with him, but Hugo Weaving really just wasn't feeling the superhero genre.
Wasn't feeling the Red Skull and the superhero stuff.
Yeah, which is a heartbreaker because he played the character so well, I thought, and with the level of nuance that's come to the genre in the last decade, I would really love to see him step back in as the Skull, as the Red Skull, he was
so good. He really brought it for that movie, and it was just really interesting. And I just find it interesting that he had his one off, but we still have Loki appearing in God friggin' everything. It's just like Loki's been in as many movies as Tony Stark, it feels like, and that just seems wrong. Like, either he turns good and it's okay, or kill the damn guy by now. Like, Tom Hiddleston's a great actor and he's theatrically trained and he can do Shakespeare better than a lot of people. But like, come on, like, for real, man. I've had him in 7 movies. I've had enough. But then it's like Red Skull. I was like, I could have used a second movie of him. Nope.
Well, Red Skull is one of those villains that, without any real powers worth discussing, depending on the decade, Red Skull is one of those interesting villains that can be on the level of like a Thanos or a Loki for the danger he poses, just because he's that evil and that like long reaching with his evil. Like, he thinks it through, and he's
a literal Nazi. Like,
yes,
it's like he's a Nazi with superhuman intelligence and superhuman quality. So it's like, take everything about Indiana Jones villains and throw it into the world of comic books, and it's like, why would we not want to get more traction out of this? Because we can never get enough of Indiana Jones beating up Nazis.
But I'll tell you, if they kill off Steve Rogers, I don't want to see the Red Skull come back, because
they're going to kill
Skull
Steve
without Steve just doesn't work for me.
Well, because the skull is Steve's. Like, that's his Lex Luthor as far as the comics are concerned. Another thing that I think is interesting, not necessarily a hot take, but an attempt for me to just sum everything up into a nutshell. I think the Iron Man movies would have been unequivocally better than the Captain America movies as a whole if the Captain America writing team, or if the Iron Man writing team would have just done one thing. They would have stopped being fascinated with the suit. And here's what I mean. A big chunk, if not all, of the conflict in all 3 of his movies comes back to someone else is trying to get their hands on the schematics to make their own version of the suit. And it's the same thing I said with Loki. Not a bad concept, not a bad way to do it. But if I'm watching, each of those 3 movies is over 2 hours long. I'm watching 6 hours of 3 different movies of a main character with different villains. But the best thing that the writers could ever come up with is, oh man, they may have got Tony Stark's plan to, like, figured out how to make Tony Stark's suit again. Oh, we better fix that. Like, You couldn't get a little bit more creative with all the real estate that Iron Man is giving you from the comic books?
Well, and I am intrigued by how many times he has supposedly hung up the suit only to then have a fancier version in the next Marvel film.
Or to even create something like Ultron. Like, I guess it's just that there's stuff that could have been done to make them better. And especially with, like, I think Iron Man 2 is the one that suffered the most, because I had Iron Man 2 higher on my list than you did, but like, Mickey Rourke is a phenomenal actor and he did a great job with his bit in that movie, but he is a grade A top-notch actor. And Sam Rockwell has always been a low-key favorite of mine. I see almost everything he's in. I love that he's got an Oscar now. The dude brings it and he's versatile. And I thought that he was an incredible way to infuse acting chops and humor into the sinister side of things in that universe. But it's like, at the same time, it's like, man, you just want to make another suit. And Whiplash is clearly a character that is way more developed in the comic books that was just kind of glossed over. And it was really sad because what Mickey Rourke did with that character had an awful lot of real estate there. And so I'm just sitting here thinking, like, man, I enjoyed Iron Man 2, but I think it could have been almost phenomenal. Really could have been.
You know, I think Iron Man 2 is one of those movies. I think I did want to get into this too as our reversed Iron Man 2 and 3. Because I don't hate either movie, but I think 2 suffers from being a sequel for a sequel's sake.
Definitely.
And I think that, you know, because you do have Mickey Rourke, who has been really vocal about how angry he was at the lack of substance to his character after he, you know, I mean, he was kind of writing this same way. There was such a great meta story there where, like, Robert Downey Jr. got clean and became Iron Man, and now Mickey Rourke was in The Wrestler, and he's turning his life around, and he's going to be the bad guy in Iron Man. And you're like, wow, there's some levels to this that I can't articulate, but they're pretty cool. And I felt like, yeah, Mickey Rourke was really underutilized, and he felt it too. But I did, you know, we agreed, and then there's a Twitter that I followed. I quoted this online today. Said we were going to cite it tonight, so shout out to the Movie Deaths Twitter. But, you know, this person said that they've seen the original Iron Man like 100 times and Iron Man 2 and 3 maybe 3 times. And that's me too. Like, when I read that, I was like, oh, that's absolutely me. Yep. And so I think that 2 and 3 are fascinating to me because they just failed to capture our imagination like the first one did. And yet our love of the character was totally unfazed, right? Like, nobody said, screw those Iron Man movies, only one of them's good. Everybody's like, I wish 2 and 3 were a little better.
I think we handed over our money gleefully and even were entertained and even enjoyed them.
Yeah.
But then in our hot take Twitter culture that we are all willing participants of, then it becomes a level of saying, okay, well, then we have to rank it, we have to pick, we have to do these sorts of things because that's what we do. It's what we're doing right now, and I love it. I'm a sucker for that sort of stuff. So then it's kind of like, okay, well, yeah, I really enjoy living in the MCU, and the main ones needed to have their equal amount of movies and those sorts of things and stuff. And it just seems like that we get to the point where, yeah, we enjoy Iron Man 2, we enjoy Iron Man 3, but we are no means proud of them. Whereas the Winter Soldier, Civil War, the first Iron Man, those sorts of things, people are proud of. But coincidentally, those are the ones that, you know, have the strongest writing. That's what we keep coming back to, essentially. It's just really interesting to me that, I don't know, I guess it just becomes a greater conversation of what is the purpose then? Are we wanting to be entertained by characters that we enjoy in a universe that we know is going to go on and on, like the James Bond movies? And then every once in a while, there's one that just comes along and then it's like, holy crap, Skyfall, holy crap. But really, it's just like James Bond. Or are we really genuinely still thirsty for those Christopher Nolan type moments and want a packaged trilogy or more of just, holy crap, was this mind-blowing cinema? I don't know if there's a concrete answer to that.
So for you, what's the difference maker that puts Iron Man 2 over Iron Man 3 for you?
Mickey Rourke and Sam Rockwell.
Yeah.
And the fact that basically Iron Man 3 was just more suit stuff. And everything they did with Ben Kingsley in Iron Man 3 was just a throwaway.
Yeah.
And that was supposed to be a big selling point. And I don't know. I maybe I'm just not invested in the comics enough. I don't like the idea of Colonel James Rhodes having an Iron Man suit. I don't like the idea of him battling along like Iron Man. I want to watch Iron Man do Iron Man things.
Yeah, War Machine's always been an interesting character to me because he always just felt to me like Iron Man, but
Wannabe.
80s, 90s edition, where we're going to make it. What?
I was just saying, and coming back to the emotional stakes thing, like obviously he's had a much longer arc in the comic books. I get that, but it's like I have absolutely no emotional attachment to his concept of being Iron Man Part 2. You know what I mean? Like being the sidekick of the actual I'm wearing a suit and battling. Like I don't know. It's just I don't think they fleshed that out very well at all, other than the fact that like they're buddies and they work in the war business.
Well, and I feel like, again, this is back to when the Iron Man movies got made, and if they could have just had 5 more years for the genre to grow. I think there's a missed opportunity in the Rhodey character where they could have leaned more, and you get some bit of this, but they could have leaned more into, in a more engaging way, the idea that he's the government guy who thinks we need to, put these weapons in the hands of the government, and Iron Man is the guy who's saying, hold up. And maybe you can do a little bit of that growth towards Civil War that way, where, Iron Man is gradually coming to see things more and more Rhodey's way. I don't know. I'm not trying to tell anyone else how to write their movies because, none of mine have been picked up yet. But sitting here with that, I got that Inhuman script for you guys.
I'm ready, guys. When you're ready, let's do it. I'm cheap.
Right? Yeah, I'd settle for $1 million.
At the end of the day, even with all of its flaws, Mickey Rourke and Sam Rockwell sell it enough for me. I still wish Iron Man 2 was better, but maybe it's just because I'm a fan of them. Like Mickey Rourke and Sam Rockwell make Iron Man 2 better than Iron Man 3. That's where I'm at.
So for me, the reason why I put 3 just a scotch ahead of 2 is just because I felt like 2 played it so safe, and that's its problem. Whereas 3 tried some things, and to be fair, I think it failed at a lot of those things. And that sounds like I didn't like the movie, and I did. But I think 3 fails more than it succeeds. However, I do appreciate that it tried some different stuff, and it made it a more interesting watch to me than just the sequel for sequel's sake in number 2. And so, I mean, again, we're splitting hairs there. At least I am.
Splitting hairs to see who's scraping the bottom.
Right, exactly. But that's for me how those 2 broke down.
All right, so let's do it right now, Jake. In just a few seconds, tell me who dies in Infinity War. Who is not coming back?
Tony Stark, getting the axe. I think that we are being misled to believe that Steve Rogers will die. I think Steve gets to retire in style. And I think that Tony makes the ultimate sacrifice finally to once and for all redeem himself and die a hero, reuniting with his friends, making amends for his mistakes, and protecting people finally like he's wanted to all along. So I think Tony's story is more Shakespearean, and it deserves that kind of ending. Shakespearean's a bit dramatic for Robert Downey Jr. as
that Tony Stark. Tony Stark. He might as well be Hamlet. You know what I mean? I agree with you that would be the most stunning way for that character to go out. It would also be interesting to see. Obviously, they're playing up the Captain America thing. If Captain America bites it, it will have to be in a situation where Tony Stark feels partially guilty about it too. Like that's the only other character trait for that. It'll be interesting to see. I'm definitely getting the vibe too from the limited pop culture reporting that I follow, that it seems like Robert Downey is mentally at a place where he's more ready to call it quits than necessarily Chris Evans is too. So that's obviously a contributing factor. It's like whoever they choose to kill, if they don't kill both of them, it probably would be, I'd be able to lean towards more RDJ as well, just from the standpoint of like, it seems like he's ready to be done.
Yeah. And he's carried this colossal franchise for so long.
He was in half of Spider-Man. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I think other than those two being the big ones, I think there's a decent, but not, I don't know, I'd say 50-50 shot on Thor dying. Because even though Ragnarok was a big hit, even though everybody, Hemsworth saying suddenly that he likes the character again, I'm reading stuff recently where he's saying, nah, I'm done.
It's hard to believe this all of Infinity War is going to happen without at least one of the main guys dying. Like you got to think at least RDJ or Chris Evans are done, possibly a Thor, like you mentioned, but like, right? Like that seems like that's one of the things that we are owed with the lead up to this movie is somebody's got to get voted off the island, right?
Yeah, I think to me, there's this question of, do you bring in, because yes, you're right. There have been so many teases of death for so long that now someone's got to make good on it. Now that you've got a threat like Thanos and the Infinity Gauntlet, to me, there's this question of, do you introduce the comic book trope of death never sticks, and do you, so that you can kill so many people, but then be like, hey, everybody's back at the end? Or do you make it stick in this version of the universe? And I think that's what's interesting, because I'm not sure I'd like for death to not stick in this universe, but maybe that's just because it hasn't been done yet. I don't know. Death
has got to happen in Infinity War. I mean, ultimately, that's what I'm looking for.
They had a new trailer out today. They're calling it the final trailer.
Oh yeah, I haven't watched it yet. I'm a horrible fan. I need to watch it.
Oh, I just caught it while we were getting ready here. It's great though. Go check it out if you haven't yet, everybody.
Nice. Rock on. Well, hit us up on the Twitters or on the Instagrams. We are on Twitter at Watch Comics with an X, at Watch Comics Pod, or on Instagram we are at Watching Comics Podcast. Hit us up. We want to hear from you. And check out our website. Send us some fan mail at watchingcomics.com. And the big thing is just gear up, ramp up for Infinity War. It's coming next week. We're going to be dishing on that on our next episode. You can count on that. Want to see who dies. Want to see the big battle. It's going down.
Yeah, come on back. We'd be happy to tell you what to think about it.